There is a city 40 kilometers southeast of Addis Ababa called Bishoftu. Until recently, most people outside Ethiopia had never heard of it. That is about to change, because right now, in the fields around Bishoftu, construction crews are breaking ground on what will become the largest airport ever built on the African continent. 110 million passengers a year at full build-out, 4 runways, parking for 270 aircraft. Designed by Zaha Hadid architects, costing $12.5 billion, with 80% of its passengers expected to be in transit, meaning they never even enter Ethiopia. This is not a national airport. It is a continental weapon, and the airline building it has been preparing for this moment for 80 years. But to understand why Bishoftu matters, and why the airline behind it is unlike anything else on this continent, I need to take you back to 1945, to a country with no pilots, no aircraft, and no aviation infrastructure of any kind, and ask one question: how does something like this start? It starts, as so many things in aviation do, with a problem that nobody else wants to solve. Africa is the world's second largest continent, 54 countries, 1.4 billion people, some of the fastest growing economies on Earth. It should, by every reasonable measure, support a thriving aviation market. It largely does not, and the reasons why are structural and deep. The first is geography without infrastructure. African cities are often enormous distances apart, connected by road networks that make surface travel impractical, and served by airports that range from genuinely world-class to barely functional. The demand for air travel exists. The infrastructure to capture it often does not. The second is the bilateral agreement system. Flying between 2 African countries requires both governments to have signed an air services agreement granting traffic rights. Historically, these agreements across Africa have been restrictive, protectionist, and slow to negotiate. An airline wanting to fly between Lagos and Nairobi faces not just the commercial challenge of filling an aircraft, but the regulatory challenge of obtaining the rights to operate the route at all. The third is thin route economics. Routes between African cities often do not generate enough passenger volume to support the frequency that makes an airline commercially viable. You need frequency to attract business travelers. You need business travelers to generate the yield that makes frequency affordable. Breaking into that cycle from a standing start requires capital, patience, and a network large enough that individual thin routes are cross-subsidized by stronger ones. Every African airline that has attempted to build a continent-wide network has confronted all 3 of these problems simultaneously. Most have collapsed under the weight of them. South African Airways, Kenya Airways, and Nigeria Air, for example. Carriers with better starting positions, stronger economies behind them, and in some cases, international airline backing. All of them struggled. Several of them failed. Ethiopian found a way through. Not by luck, not by geography alone, but by making a series of strategic choices so consistent and so disciplined over 8 decades that today the result looks almost inevitable. It was not inevitable. It was built. The foundation of everything Ethiopian has built is Addis Ababa's geographic position. And this is worth understanding properly rather than just accepting as a given. Addis Ababa sits in the northeast of Africa, in the Horn, which does not sound like the center of anything. But when you look at Africa's population distribution and city network, its position is remarkably central relative to where people actually are and where they want to go. Nairobi is 2 hours away, Lagos is 4 hours, Johannesburg 5, and Casablanca is 6 hours. Almost every major African city is reachable on a medium-haul sector from Addis Ababa. This created an opportunity that the hub model is specifically designed to exploit. Ethiopian flies from Addis Ababa to 65 African destinations. A passenger from Accra who wants to reach Dar es Salaam flies Accra to Addis, connects, and continues. Ethiopian captures that connecting traffic because it is the only airline with the network density to make that connection viable efficiently. No other African carrier has enough African routes to offer the same range of connections through a single hub. And here is the critical dynamic. The more African destinations Ethiopian serves, the more connecting itineraries it can offer. The more connecting itineraries it offers, the more traffic flows through Addis. The more traffic flows through Addis, the more commercially viable each individual route becomes, because each route benefits from the connecting passengers that every other route feeds into it. It is the same hub logic that built Frankfurt for Lufthansa and Dubai for Emirates. Ethiopian was applying it to Africa at a time when no other carrier had the ambition or the resources to do it systematically. The network effect compounded for decades. And by the time competitors understood what had been built, the advantage was so deep, it was structurally irreversible. But network strategy explains the shape of what Ethiopian built. It does not explain how they survived long enough to build it. Because building African routes from thin traffic takes time, and time requires money. And money for a state-owned African airline in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s was not guaranteed. The Ethiopian government, across multiple administrations and through genuinely difficult political periods, made a decision that is unusual in African aviation history. They funded the airline as long-term national infrastructure rather than demanding short-term commercial returns. They provided the runway and expected management to build something that eventually would not need it. What separates Ethiopian from every other African state airline that receives similar support is what management did with it. Rather than using government backing to subsidize unprofitable operations indefinitely, Ethiopian used it to fund network expansion that was designed from the beginning to reach commercial viability. The discipline was internal. Ethiopian has turned a profit every year for nearly 2 decades, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Its revenues grew 8% to $7.6 billion in the most recent fiscal year. And over the previous year, they grew 15%. Look, that consistency, profit through famine, through civil war, through a pandemic that grounded global aviation, is not an accident. It is the consequence of a management philosophy that treated commercial discipline as non-negotiable, regardless of the political environment outside the airline's doors. Network and financial discipline explain survival. Vertical integration explains dominance. Ethiopian Airlines does not just operate flights. It controls almost every element of the aviation value chain that its operations depend on, and several that other airlines depend on too. The Ethiopian Aviation Academy trains pilots, cabin crew, maintenance engineers, and ground handling staff, not just for Ethiopian, but for other African carriers who send their people to Addis for training. This solves 2 problems simultaneously. It reduces Ethiopia's dependence on the global pilot and engineer market, where African carriers have historically been at a disadvantage, competing against better-paying Western airlines. And it generates revenue from training other airlines while building relationships across the continent that reinforce Ethiopia's central position. The MRO operation is the most capable aircraft maintenance facility on the African continent, handling heavy maintenance on Ethiopia's own fleet and contracting for third-party work from airlines beyond Africa. The cargo terminal at Addis Ababa Bole International Airport is one of the continent's largest and most modern. Ethiopian Cargo operates 70 freighter routes across 5 continents. On many thinner passenger routes to smaller African cities, the belly cargo revenue is what makes the route viable at all. Flowers, fresh produce, pharmaceutical shipments, electronics, the belly of an Ethiopian passenger jet is often a critical link in supply chains with no alternative. Taken individually, each of these operations is sensible vertical integration. Taken together, they represent something more significant. An airline that has made itself structurally difficult to displace because it has built the supporting infrastructure that African aviation depends upon. A competitor that wants to challenge Ethiopian in Africa does not just need aircraft and routes. It needs pilot training capacity, maintenance capability, cargo infrastructure, and ground handling expertise. Ethiopian has spent decades building all of those things in the most geographically central location on the continent. The moat is not just wide, it is deep. The fleet strategy that supports all of this reflects the same deliberate thinking. Ethiopian currently operates a fleet of more than 167 aircraft and has approximately 124 aircraft on order from Boeing and Airbus, including firm orders and purchase rights. Ethiopian was the first African airline to operate the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, taking delivery of its first example in 2012. This was not a prestige decision. The 787's fuel efficiency on medium to long-haul routes, its extended range capability, and its lower cabin altitude aligned almost perfectly with what Ethiopia needed. The 787-9 order, placed in December 2025, will bring Ethiopia's total Dreamliner fleet to 39 aircraft upon delivery, with the 787-9 count rising from 10 to 19. At the Dubai Air Show in November 2025, Ethiopian also ordered 6 Airbus A350-900 aircraft alongside 11 Boeing 737 MAX jets. The A350 additions will bring the airline's A350 fleet to 32 aircraft, making it the second most prominent type in the fleet. The A350-900 delivers approximately 25% lower fuel consumption than the aircraft types it is replacing. The intercontinental network is the commercial engine that funds the Pan-African expansion. Routes to London, Frankfurt, Paris, Beijing, Guangzhou, New York, and Washington generate the yield that cross-subsidizes the thinner African routes building network density. The 787 and the A350 are the aircraft that make those routes commercially viable at the economics the model requires. The equity partnership strategy that sits alongside the fleet strategy is the final piece. Rather than simply competing with struggling African carriers, Ethiopian has taken stakes in national airlines across the continent and provided operational support. Ethiopian is pursuing a multi-hub strategy through hubs in Lome, Togo with ASCII, in Lilongwe, Malawi with Malawi Airlines, in Lusaka, Zambia with Zambia Airways, and in Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with Air Congo. A functioning national carrier in Togo feeds passengers into the Ethiopian network at Addis Ababa. Ethiopian provides the operational expertise, the training, the maintenance support, and sometimes the aircraft that keeps the partner carrier viable. African Aviation's version of the franchise model, adapted for a continent where many carriers are too small and too under-resourced to function independently. Now, here is where the story arrives at the present moment, and where the scale of what Ethiopian is building becomes genuinely difficult to fully comprehend. Bole Airport currently has capacity for 22 million passengers a year. Ethiopian expects to handle 66 million by 2035. That gap is not manageable with expansion. It requires a completely new facility. But there's a second problem at Bole Airport that almost nobody in Western aviation coverage mentions, and it is arguably more important than the capacity ceiling. Bole Airport sits at an altitude of 2,300 meters above sea level, making it one of the highest major airports in the world. Taking off at high altitude is problematic because lower air density means wings generate less lift. Aircraft need to accelerate for longer and climb at a slower rate, adding costs and reducing each plane's maximum payload and how far it can fly before refueling. In practical terms, Ethiopian cannot currently operate full payload non-stop flights in North America from Bole. The altitude forces a choice between carrying fewer passengers, less cargo, or less fuel. All three options cost real money on every single departure. The solution to both problems, the capacity ceiling and the altitude penalty, is the same project. On January 10th, 2026, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed laid the foundation stone for Bishoftu International Airport, located 40 kilometers southeast of Addis Ababa. The airport will have space to park 270 aircraft and capacity for 110 million passengers a year. Bishoftu sits approximately 400 meters lower than Bole. From Bishoftu, Ethiopian's aircraft could carry either more cargo or more fuel, making it possible to offer direct flights to North America that are currently limited by Bole Airport's altitude. Phase 1 of Bishoftu International Airport is scheduled to handle 60 million passengers annually. The design places a strong emphasis on transfer traffic, with up to 80% of passengers expected to transit through the airport without entering Ethiopia. Designed by Zaha Hadid Architects, financed by a combination of Ethiopian Airlines equity, African Development Bank debt, a $500 million Chinese bank commitment, and investor pledges from across Africa, Europe, North America, and Asia. Total investment, $12.5 billion. Ethiopian has turned a profit every year for nearly 2 decades. Quote from aviation consultant Sean Mendes, "Ethiopian Airlines is about as blue chip as you can get if you are looking at infrastructure in Africa. This is not aspiration." The earthworks began in late 2025. Main construction contracts commence in October 2026. Phase 1 targets completion in 2030. And now, with the Gulf crisis having big problems with hubs like Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi simultaneously, something that has always been true about Ethiopian Airlines has become impossible to ignore. Ethiopian Airlines reported $7.6 billion in revenue for the 2024 to 2025 fiscal year, an 8% increase year on year. Passenger numbers grew 11% to 19.1 million. These results were achieved despite active conflicts disrupting routes in Sudan, the Middle East, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The airline that built Africa's aviation infrastructure through famine, civil war, pandemic, and regional conflict is absorbing connecting traffic that previously flowed through Dubai and Doha, not as a temporary crisis windfall, as the beginning of a structural shift toward an African hub that has been 40 years in the making. Vision 2035 targets, $29 billion in revenue, 65 million passengers, and a top 20 global ranking. The current position, 167 aircraft, 19.1 million passengers, $7.6 billion in revenue, is not a starting point. It is a midpoint. In 1945, Ethiopia had 5 aircraft, 1 route, and borrowed American pilots. Today, the airline that grew from those 5 C-47 transports is building the largest airport in African history, 40 kilometers from the city where it started. An airport designed not for the passengers who live in Ethiopia, but for the passengers of the world who need Africa to be a hub rather than a destination. A facility that will make the altitude problem disappear, the capacity problem irrelevant, and the geographic advantage permanent. The Gulf crisis showed the world what happens when too much of aviation's connecting infrastructure is concentrated in one volatile region. Bishoftu is the answer from a different direction. Not a replacement for the Gulf, but a genuine alternative. A second center of gravity for the world's long-haul connecting traffic, built in a country that most people still associate with the wrong decade, serving a continent that is about to become the world's fastest-growing aviation market. The story of Ethiopian Airlines is not finished. It is not even close to finished. And here is the thing about stories that are still being written. You have to be present to see where they go. Phase 1 of Bishoftu opens in 2030. The Vision 2035 targets are already being revised upward. The order book keeps growing. The Gulf crisis keeps accelerating demand for exactly what Addis Ababa offers. Every one of those chapters is happening, and we are following this close on this channel. What does Ethiopian Airlines look like in 2035? I genuinely want to find out. I think you do too. If you were not subscribed before this video and you want to be updated on everything that has something to do with aviation, the button is right below this video. I will leave you with these 2 last questions. Did you ever have the chance to fly with this carrier, and what do you hope is going to happen in the future for Ethiopian Airlines? Let's see those comments down below, and stay tuned for the next video. If you enjoyed this video and want to actually understand how aircraft work beyond surface level explanations, there's a great resource I recommend. It's called Flight Unveiled. It's a complete bundle that covers both pilot knowledge and aircraft engineering, from aerodynamics and systems to flight instruments, navigation, and real-world operations. Instead of piecing information together from different videos, it gives you a structured, deeper understanding of aviation in one place. You can click the link that appears now in the right upper corner or in the description below.